The time is 7:36. I now call to order this meeting of the RTM F&B committee. Where are you? Okay. We have a new member joining us from District 3. That's Bill Dunn. So, Bill, you want to give a little introduction about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Jack. How are you? Nice to be here
Fine.
this evening. Thank you for having me. And I live over in Heather Lane. I've been lived in town here now for 25 years, and we put a couple of my daughters through the schools here at home school, and then middle and the high school. And they're off and away, and I found myself with some time here, and I'm not going into the city as much as I used to. So I thought this would be a pretty good. I've always wanted to get a little bit more involved in town politics, and I thought this would be a good way to do it. And so I joined the RTM recently, and then Jack suggested that I come to F&B here. So here I am.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Actually, Beth also suggested that as well. So since that we're all in the same district, and that just worked out fine. Okay.
Welcome.
Very good. Thank you.
The next thing is I want to discuss and take action on the proposed planning and zoning fees to be included in the fiscal 24 budget. Hopefully people took the time to watch the RTM P&Z meeting. During that meeting, Jeremy did a wonderful explanation of both the P&Z department and the building department, went into detail on their budgets, also explained the relationship with other boards and commissions, and then again discuss the fees as part of that. The way Jeremy, it's been 3 years since we upped the fees. Jeremy's seen things such as certified mail that the town has to send out go for about $3 a letter up to $10 a letter. And having worked with Jeremy in the past on this, he does a very detailed analysis of, based upon certain activities that the P&Z does, what's the amount of time that staff puts on it, what's the amount of time, based upon different levels for small things, for larger things, for one that's going in front of the board, what's the time that people put in, what are the expenses associated with it, what are the other costs for recording things so it goes into the system, as well as mail costs and other associated costs. I say a little jokingly that he actually counts the paper clips that he uses in there, although most of the people now have it automated. With that, hopefully people watched it. So I need a motion to approve the P&Z fees to be included in the February 24th budget, which was included in the memo by Jeremy Ginsburg, department head of the land use services, in his memo to the RTM. Do I have somebody? Bill, you can't vote on these things, but until we have the official meeting, just so that everybody knows. So we're still at effectively Jenny 12. All right. Bill gets called a guest. So do I have a motion to move that motion? Somebody raised their hand. I have Jenny. I have Louisa as a second. Any discussion or questions on that item? I'm not asking who watched or who didn't. Seeing no questions, are we ready to move on this? All in favor, raise your hands. That looks unanimous. Bill, are you voting for or against?
I'm voting for.
Okay, super. So it's unanimous.
Yeah, I mean, it's we're lucky to have Jeremy. He's an impressive individual.
Yes, very much so. We're also very lucky. My first time at the P&Z meeting, as we watched it move from one Amy to the other Amy. And I will also say that Amy Z is very impressive in her knowledge base of this. The town's lucky to have both of them associated with these P&Z items. Okay. Quick discussion on the Great
Back,
Island.
may I interrupt just 1 minute?
Sure.
Malin, did you miss the vote or are you coming
Oh.
late? Because I need to
Yes.
count that.
Yes, just came in. Sorry.
Okay. No, that's okay. That's okay. Thanks.
Quick overview, because I've been asked on what my take on Great Island is. The purchase price from the family is $85 million. The overall purchase price for Great Island, and maybe this was a little misleading in the announcement, is still $103 million. Part of the negotiation was, I wrote some things down here. Part of the negotiation was said to be on remediation, access, and interest. I'm going to address the interest first. That may be part of what they negotiated, but the reality is the former current market rates, and I'll explain that comment, was less than what is currently in the fiscal 24 budget. So that wasn't a part of it. What they put in when they were doing their calculation for market rates was still higher. Now, that doesn't take into account that with what happened in the banking industry today to regional banks, my understanding is, and Louisa, you can comment on this having more knowledge than I, but munis dropped like 100 basis points today because there was a significant flight to muni securities and other government securities by investors. So if that continues, then the rate is definitely lower than what's in the budget. Is that reasonably correct, Louisa?
Yes, I think that what we've seen is a little bit of just, I will say, but panic that start running with the deposit base of Silicon Valley. They rely a lot on companies instead of they lack the consumer deposit that is less sensitive to changes in moving funds because of rates. So I think that it was a mismanaged the risk management on the bank. They have a lot of really long-term assets funding with really their company's deposit base, and they created a panic that started running the funds. So this brings a lot of flight to quality, and the measures that we saw taken by the Fed extraordinary on just open the window for financing with them these long-term securities without any haircut. So I think that's still very volatile. I think we need to look tomorrow at the numbers. It comes at a time when the Fed is increasing rates. Most likely they will not increase the 50 basis points, but tomorrow is an important read. But this will create a lot of really break on the economy because, and I can see it in my bank. It is just we're just being more careful on the lending side. So yes, I think that's still pretty volatile, and we need to see what is happening in the coming days. But we will continue to see, I think, the flight to quality.
Well, I know this is a little off topic, but some of you may not know that at one time on when I was at Chase, I was in the bank acquisition market, and I was the project manager of, at that time, two of the top 10 largest FDIC bank failures. So I know exactly what's going on right now. There, just read that HBSC bought the British part of SVB for £1. That's basically because they're going to take over the deposits. They want the relationships. These other two banks will have their deposits sold. And then the Fed is willing to take any place from 50 cents to 70 cents on the dollar for their own Fed securities, because the Fed is partially responsible, even though risk management wasn't properly done. The rocket ship of how he was raising rates in the Fed has never been seen before. And so treasuries were having a little bit of problems because their portfolios, which were basically T-bills, T-notes, and mortgage-backed securities, could not compete with what the drop is. So the Fed's willing to take over that asset. And if you remember from your accounting days in corporations, if you're able to buy a bond that you issued for $100 for $70, you get to record it as extraordinary income. So the Fed itself bought a lot of extraordinary income here because they're retiring certain debt at a much lower basis points. The assets, which were typically 5 to 10 years on venture, will be evaluated by various banks. Some will be sold, some will be sold at a discount, and others may very well be just managed by the Fed, which the Fed typically does in their loan portfolio. But this was definitely liquidity, not a bad loan. It wasn't that they invested in bad things, whether or not their timing on matching short-term funding with long-term lending, that's up for grabs, and they can question that. But that's just from the other thing. I've gotten multiple calls today where I had to explain the same thing over and over again and tell them, don't worry. So I do want to go back then. So that's the interest rates. That our interest rates, while it was mentioned as something, really isn't something of risk. I got to imagine, and I don't need to know the number. I know this. Jim Palin was on, and he may have greater detail, but I don't want to get into it. It's reasonable to believe that a significant part of the difference in the 18 million is remediation efforts, and that's part of why it was negotiated down. And access was the other thing, and I'm not getting into access of what they might be doing on the access. When it's time for us to know, they will tell us.
Jack,
That being
if I may, I am.
Wait, let me finish.
Go ahead.
Because I know what you're going to say. That being said, the RTM authorized $103 million appropriation and bonding for a wide range of aspects for the purchase of Great Island. That wasn't just the land acquisition, since the purchase of Great Island will include remediation, access, and other things along those lines. The Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance do not have to come back. That was a question that was raised by someone. Wayne Fox spoke to bond counsel, and as I suspected, the bond resolution that we passed, as is many of the bond resolutions that we pass, is pretty open and covers a wide range of things to be included in there. So the deal was done with the concept that they had the authority to spend up to $103 million and to bond up to $103 million. And as I said, even though transparency is important, they need not come back. You can see what they're doing by just going to the Board of Finance meetings or Board of Selectmen meetings, because they have to discuss it. Should they get to 103 million and 1 penny and looking for more money, the RTM will have the full right to ask for the accounting of the 103 million if we did not get it previously. So just so that everybody understands that aspect of it. It's not up for debate, and we cannot rescind. Go ahead.
No, Jack, I understand that. My question is, regarding contingencies and remediation and access, especially my understanding is that there's an easement issue that is in question here. It's really hard for me to understand why these actual contingencies and this, especially with the question of the easement, was not presented to us when we voted. It doesn't take a genius to be able to at least infer that all of those issues are material facts in any commercial transaction, regard land or otherwise. And it has been bothering me that there all of just these discussions about, well, we have to reach an easement, we have to deal with certain contingencies. If we knew about these contingencies when we were voting, we should have been told about them. And I remember there were issues about confidentiality, and I believe that that's fine. We should all maintain then every RTM member should have been read into what these issues were, and if necessary, sign an NDA if we had to. But and I know this is looking backwards, but it's really hard for me not to look backward when other people are also agree with me that why didn't we know about these ahead of time? It's hard not to have the inference that this is an omission of material fact that we should have known about when we voted. And let me just say one thing. I want the darn land. I want the park. I'm not against the park. Let me rephrase. I am questioning the process of the information that was given to the RTM at the time. Again, it was under rushed circumstances because we had to apparently there were a lot of people lined up who wanted to buy this previous property. And a number of people have asked me, well, where are all these other people that want to buy this, would have been interested in buying this property? So given the time frame and all of those issues, I have to ask the question. It's one of the reasons why I voted against it.
So I want to answer the question in two parts. Number one, for me personally, having done significant deals with Chase, looking at the property, I can't use the words that I would do if this wasn't being publicly recorded. There was no way that there were other people lining up for this deal. The current interest rates for any developer to go build this, the fact that it had no sewers lines or anything else like that there was questions on the access road, that they too would have had remediation issues, and what the cost of building during the pandemic, which has gone up significantly, would make it to be very hard for somebody to think they were going to develop it. The only thing that I thought possibly could have been is a pension plan that wanted to just sit on it for a period of time and hope that it grows at some level. That being said, I don't think there was a material omission of facts in two ways. Number one, I know that Amy Z had mentioned and several others had mentioned during the time of the acquisition that there was an access issue. So that was not something that wasn't raised. Whether or not they answered it, that's something else, but it was raised and in the public eye. The second
Jack, I
thing,
think we can shorten this greatly. What I'd like to know is when are the Board of Selectmen going to give us a full briefing as to what these remediation and access issues are and what are being done about them? Because I think we have to know.
I am telling you, they do not have to. We've already approved it, and I'm not saying they won't, but and I know we'd like it, and we'd like the Board of Finance to provide more information on this, but I actually think that's part of what due diligence is on any commercial property, because that's where the negotiations are going to start for what the cost is to fix the remediation, and then what we could negotiate. If the town, hopefully, was not satisfied with what the reduction in the price was based upon the remediation, they brought in outside people to estimate these costs. Instead of town people, they brought in experts in that. They would have and should have walked away from the deal. However, from what I understand, I had a brief conversation with Kate and I asked her, is $18 million going to be enough to handle the remediation and the access? And the answer I was told is, based upon the estimates that we have, the answer is yes. So, we can request that, but I can't answer for the Board of Selectmen. I don't want to. I can't even answer, and I know Jim's here, I'm not going to ask him to get involved in it, on what's going to be going on. I think that I just explained where we are in the RTM, and I know Seth is pursuing getting more information to be presented to us. And I think we should move on from there. Go ahead, Iris.
I just want to say one thing that I'm not gonna, is it just because you don't have to do something doesn't mean you shouldn't. And I do believe that there's a real lack of openness in what's going on with Great Island. And I feel there's been some disingenuousness with the way it's been put out there to the public. And I think that with something, and I'm for it. I'm recorded as being for it. But I just believe that there needs to, now that it's a done, whatever, you need to, whether you need to, you're legally required to or not, you need to do some clarification for a lot of people out there on what's happening, what your strategic thing is. Maybe we got a lesser price from the family, but we have to still do the remediation. That's still money out of our pocket. What are we doing? Why are we doing it? I just think that maybe Monica needs to put out a little bit more detail about what's happening for people to feel, and they may disagree with her or agree with her, but at least they have a basis for what they're talking about. And so I just think it would be a public benefit for that to happen.
I can agree with that. I'll also say that if I was part of the negotiation team, which I was not, and there was remediation, I would negotiate to lower the price, and I would want to do remediation on the property that I bought to ensure that, number one, it was done properly, and number two, it was done within a time frame that I wanted it to be done with. So in many of this stuff, when you go and take things over, you'd rather do it yourself, and you hope that your estimate is really reasonable and you've given yourself some contingency there to to make sure that you come in under the 18. But I'm sure Monica will hear the comments that were made. And I only wanted to deal with one other issue because I've been asked this about 30 times since the announcement. Access to the property. I would not expect access to the property for the next 12 to 18 months for the public. There's some reasons for it. Number one, there's no public parking currently there. Number two, there are no public bathrooms. And so I'm going to try and say this the nicest way without annoying half of Darien. But we don't, with no public bathrooms, we don't need to add to the cost of remediation by having residents run to the woods to relieve themselves. So, yeah, thank you. It's said with a little jest. Number three, I don't know why anyone would want to be on that property while there's remediation going on. I don't know what needs to be remediated. I've mentioned to people, back in the 60s, and I'm a tree hugger, but back in the 60s, when you changed the oil on your car, nobody thought anything of dumping it into the ground. Malin actually confirmed that on something that she experienced. Or in fact, I know people like my dad took the oil and dumped it into the sewer. So I can only imagine what might be on that property that they're remediating. Plus, they had an orchard, and we don't know what chemicals were used or not used on that orchard, at least publicly. So I don't know why anybody would want to expose themselves while this work is going on. Just my opinion. But that's my guesstimate. And I think that's pretty consistent with what Monica's been saying. Right from the beginning, we're not going to have immediate access while things are being done there. There's also the roads. When I spoke to Chief Anderson on another topic, the roads aren't wide enough to handle the current.
Because there were apple orchards and they might have chemicals on them. Oh.
Yeah. So anyway, that's just covers Great Island, and we're going to go off to the next topic and moving right along. We had to discuss and take action on the police false alarm funds to change the ordinance. I've had several conversations with Kate, Monica, Jen, Brent Hayes, who's a former member of our committee, Kim, and Chief Anderson, and I've decided that it needs more work before we're bringing forward. We're not just killing it, but it needs more work and some investigation, and so that's why it's being pulled. And we have a commitment to work with the commission, as well as Kate and Jen, to come to some conclusion. No more conversations going on that. Going to item 6. I sent out earlier the Board of Finance partners for the joint Board of Finance RTM matches. Please start communicating your counterparts. I should mention that to understand the budget for the land use, I would recommend that everybody watches the PZ and H meeting that occurred. It was they went into greater detail than I've seen Jeremy go into before on budget. There were a couple of questions that were asked, but at the end of that meeting, and he covered operating for both areas, building and P&Z, capital for both areas, and he covered them in detail. Plus, I'll remind you, in OpenGov, the detail for all of the capital is on the sheets that was developed years ago by Martha Banks and Deb Ritchie. That's used now throughout the town. And they voted to approve both the operating and capital budgets of land use. So please get in touch with Amy. If you have any questions, we can organize that with the Board of Finance, but in a separate note to Jim Palin, I will also give him the link so that his counterparts for that can watch that meeting. I think it'll answer a lot of questions, and then everybody can see if there's any more to deal with. Also, where's Bill? Bill, get on the phone again. Get on the horn. I need to decide where, Bill, we're going to put you. Originally, I was going to put you in PZ and H. I think Werner and Irish, you're on PZ and H, on land use. But I was going to put you on land use, but based upon how that went on last Thursday, I think I might move you over to Public Works. It's a good group to work on. First, I will say I think the Public Works Committee is a very strong committee, having listened to one of their more recent meetings and catching the tail end of their last one. Mark Adeletter is an excellent chair with great knowledge. Rolf is back on the committee. Frank is good. Jeff Krause is good. And several of the other members have a great understanding of what goes on. They're all assigned various parts to that. So it's a good one to go on. And take a look at the list. And if there's another one that you'd like to go on, let me know.
I'll do that.
Okay, thank you, Bill.
That sounds good, though.
Preliminary discussions of Board of Ed and Board of Selectmen budgets. This is, again, that, start looking at OpenGov, start communicating with your counterparts. I think for the most part, Park and Rec is the same as last year, but start moving on that. And what I'm missing, and I'll also be asking Jim for, is when the Board of Finance will be discussing each of these departments, so you have a rough idea of what the drop date is. So they are having a public hearing on the budgets tomorrow in the auditorium, and I imagine some other things will be discussed. I will not be at that meeting only because the 15th is also the drop dead date for certain corporate tax returns, which will be what I will be spending Tuesday night with. Is there any other questions on the Board of Ed and Board of Selectmen budgets? Nope. Okay, so we'll move on. I will get Jen to attend one of our meetings, but it was referred to during the presentation of the Board of Selectmen to the that there's going to be a slight change in how you look at certain things for the town. So I understand what they're doing. I don't understand how it will affect yet the financial statements. And so I'm going to invite Jen so she can give us an update, or at least give us a write-up on it, on what's going on. The town doesn't affect the mill rate, but let's say, I'm just going to come up with a number. Mill rate 17. We collect our taxes on the grand list. Whatever the other modifications we do, no different than before. However, the town will be allocating a portion of the tax collection directly to capital items in the reserve fund for capital non-recurring expenditures. And the remaining amounts will go into the general fund where they've always gone. So it's not that I don't know that I'm explaining this right. It's not that we're taxing for capital. We're just cutting out the step of doing all taxes going into the general fund and then doing a transfer of those taxes from the general fund back to the reserve fund for capital. So that's the change. It may have some changes on the modification of year-to-year financial statement comparisons. I don't quite have my arms wrapped around that right now and feel confident enough to explain that. But that's essentially what was being referred to in Monica's presentation to the Board of Finance. Jenny, you want to talk?
Is that because they might want to treat the money going into capital projects a little different in terms of managing the investment income? If you set aside a capital account, you know that you're not.
The capital account has always had its funds from that fund invested and revenue added into that fund.
Understood,
right?
but like
I can't answer that question. I don't know.
I'm just wondering if is that a reason to maybe want to break it out? Is because if you know
No, I
a
think
capital item's not going to get spent for 9 months, maybe you're investing a little closer to that duration.
I think it's really that it eliminates the step. This is when we're looking at what taxes needed to be raised. Part of it is for the capital, and part of it is for the other activities, debt service, Board of Ed operating budget, Board of Selectmen operating budget. So those three are one category, and capital, which is essentially in that, is a whole separate category. So it's just eliminating the transaction and taxing for that once the Board of Finance and the RTM figures out what the final capital amount is, all right, then that part of taxes move directly into that. And I don't know that we need, we'll invite Jen in here to answer any questions. Jim, I see you have your mic off, so if you want to add something, be my guest.
I would just very much simplify this, and there's just two types of expenditures. There's the operating expenses, which are generally consistent year after year, and they go up by a little bit, 2 to 3 to 4% per year, right? And so rather than depositing all the funds that are necessary for the operating expense and capital into the general fund, and then immediately transferring the capital amounts out of the general fund and into the reserve fund for capital non-recurring expenses, the money related to capital will go directly into the reserve fund for capital non-recurring expenses. The only reason is that capital sort of goes up and down between 1 million and 5 million per year, depending on what the town's capital needs are and what the town decides to bond or not. Operating expenses, as I indicated, are relatively steady Eddie, and they've been going up. So the idea is to create less volatility in the amount of withdrawals from the general fund each year. And so that's why the capital will go directly into where we spend the capital from, and the tax revenues associated with operating expenses will go directly into the general fund, which is where we source our operating expenses from.
I like, Jim, your latter
no change in our audit or our financials or anything like that. It's still on a consolidated basis, will be the same. And as relates to sort of how we invest capital, it either sits in the reserve fund for capital non-recurring expenses, individual project funds, or the general fund, it'll all still be, it won't change any of that either.
Right. So I do like the fact about the volatility and that it's not affecting seeing up and down movement within the general fund. So that gives an explanation. I'm still going to invite Jen so she can give a real quick explanation of how it will affect what we're seeing on the financial statements, not maybe for this year and also for comparison for next year.
So what Jim is saying is essentially is, in the end, it's all left pockets, right pockets. I mean, it's all the town's money. I just don't want this to be detrimental to transparency, because when money goes in and out of the general fund, that really does, alert us that something happened that was not planned in this way, positive or negative. But I think that's something that we should consider. What do you think, Jim?
So usually when you've historically approved the budget, you approve all the money, tax dollars being dumped into the general fund, and you simultaneously at that point are also approving a transfer of, call it $4 million from the general fund to the call it the capital fund.
Yep.
So again, this May, you'll just be approving one deposit to the general fund and one deposit to the capital fund. So Bert, the same numbers are out there and so forth. There's just one less stop on the way to the capital fund, but the numbers won't change. There won't be any less or any lower or increased disclosure. It's all the same. And again, it just creates a more consistent or less volatile set of expenditures out of the general fund, which when the rating agencies and other people look at that, it produces sort of a cleaner view into what our normal annual operating expenses and revenues are in that general fund.
Okay, so when you say rating agencies, this is not driven by a change in the methodology that the rating agencies apply.
No.
This is just something else. We're not worried about losing our AAA and doing some other things now, right?
Correct.
Okay, that's perfect. Thank you.
And I also promised that during the budget, with that, this is adding about 5 minutes on to the budget session, as every year it will be explained to the RTM of what those two fund deposits are going into the general fund and into the capital account with the rationale of why we're doing it. So I'm not worried about that. I mean, that's just to the full RTM, because, not everybody there has gone through multiple budgets. But go ahead, Jim. Oh, all right.
Nothing else.
Okay. And thank you for that, Jim. I appreciate it. We seem to have gotten done with most of the stuff that we had on the agenda, with the exception of discuss and take action on the outstanding minutes. So I'm handing the floor over to Jenny.
I emailed before the meeting the minutes from the last meeting on February 15th. My apologies for not sending it a little bit sooner. I did already send this into Krista because we haven't met in about a month. The only change I had made from the minutes, I guess I should say, I guess I needed to change the link. Jackie forwarded me a link to change the video link.
Yep.
To
Channel 79.
Right, to Channel 79. So I think I needed a motion to amend the minutes to show that the link to the video on Channel 79 is now included. Does anyone else have? I guess that's the first motion that I'm going to.
Well, we have to.
Is any other? If there are any, does anyone else have any comments or questions? Lynn?
Yeah, the $25,000 donation that we voted for was from the Darien Foundation, not the Athletic Foundation.
Oh, that's a good one. Thank you. Sorry about that. I will make that a change. Okay.
So can we vote on the revised minutes as amended?
Can I ask a quick question? If I didn't have a chance to read the minutes, do I just abstain from the vote?
That's a question. And essentially what you're voting on is the veracity of the clerk to record the minutes and with changes, that's up to you. Doesn't affect
Well,
the vote one way or the
I
other.
trust Jenny, so I'll vote for Jenny's minutes.
Yeah, that hence exactly
Hey,
my
Clara,
point.
I just needed a clarification on that.
Yeah, you don't even have
Move
to
on.
attend the meeting to vote on it anymore. That's a change in Robert's rules of order. But new minutes will be issued to reflect this. And after listening to somebody discuss boards and commissions instead of the RTM on FOIA, we will get the minutes in draft form over to Krista within 7 days, just so that she's happy. I'm not overly concerned. Is there a motion to approve the minutes as amended? I see Barry. I see Iris's second. All those in favor, say aye. Raise your hand. That's great.
Aye.
I'm assuming that everybody is there. And lastly, unless there's any new business to discuss, is there any new business? It wasn't on the agenda, but I'll ask because we're getting done quickly. I apologize for being a little late. I had signed in and forgot to push one of the buttons so that everybody else knew that the meeting was operational. So I'll take a motion to adjourn. I have Warner, I have Louisa, all in favor, say aye. You don't have to wait around for the end of the vote. Thank you very much. Our next meeting is in March 22nd or something like that. So have fun, everyone. Have a good night and drive safe tomorrow.